In this video, we will reveal the power of salt as a weapon of spiritual war. We will speak clearly and simply so that everyone can understand their pure and correct use. Watch out. Did you know that there are 3 things you can do with salt to break the whole curse and come upon you blessings of abundance? Why do you think Jesus told your disciples you are the salt of the earth? Stay until the end of this video because I will show the answer and assure you that you will be surprised by the revelations of salt as a spiritual weapon. First, we must recognize an absolute truth. Everything was created by God, through Him and to Him. There is nothing out of His will, and this implies that God created salt with a purpose. There is absolutely nothing created in this world that has not been created by God's powerful hand. For Him all things were created. The church often avoids talking about how God gives authority not only to humans, but also to plants, animals, and elements. Each thing has a divine purpose. Consider fire and water. Fire has the authority of consuming everything that touches, while water has the authority to give life. Similarly, the salt was given the authority of salting and preserving. Just as fire devours and water gives life, salt preserves and purifies. Each element is an instrument in the hands of the Almighty. Let us reflect deeply. All the elements of the world have a divine purpose. Just as salt preserves foods, does not preserve our faith in times of trial either. Salt, since ancient times, has been recognized for its unique properties and its symbolic power. In ancient times, salt was considered an essential element for conserving food, seasoning meals, and even as a bargaining chip. Its use went far beyond the physical aspect, as salt was seen as a symbol of purity, preservation, and spiritual protection. In the Holy Scriptures, salt is mentioned as a divine element, created by God for a specific purpose. Just as fire consumes and water gives life, salt was given to the authority of preserving and purifying. Each grain of salt represents the Creator's work and its ability to maintain the integrity of creation. Reflecting on the properties of salt leads us to understand that just as it preserves the food of corruption, it can also preserve our faith in times of trial. The correct use of salt not only involves its physical application, but also its spiritual understanding as a divine tool to protect and bless those who use it with reverence and faith. Throughout history, salt has also played a fundamental role as a spiritual symbol of purity and protection. Its ability to preserve and purify goes beyond the physical aspect, reflecting the Creator's work on maintaining the integrity of creation. Just as fire consumes and water gives life, salt was granted the authority of preserving not only foods, but also the faith of believers in times of trial. Each grain of salt represents God's faithfulness and care towards their children, reminding us that just as He keeps food free from corruption, it can also preserve our faith in the face of the adversities of life. Understanding the symbolism and spiritual importance of salt leads us to greater appreciation of its use as a divine tool to protect and bless those who employ it with reverence and faith. Imagine, for example, a fertile land full of crystal clear rivers and green fields. But that suddenly everything transforms. The rivers dry, the trees die, and the soil is covered from a bright white crust. What is left? Only salt. This is not just a scene of a desert documentary. In the Bible, salt also symbolizes judgment and destruction. Psalm 107 tells us that God can turn rivers into deserts and fruitlands into salinas as a sign of judgment against those who choose the path of evil. This happened with Sodom and Gomorrah. The sinful city was destroyed, and its land became an infertile desert covered with salt. Lot's own wife, when looking back, became a statue of salt, a reminder of what happens when we do not follow God's ways. Salt, which preserves and tastes, can also be a curse symbol. Where there was life, now there is only sterility. Does this also apply to our lives? If we move away from the right ways, can our spiritual life become dry and without fruits? Today, when we receive our salary, we don't even think of the origin of this word. But did you know that the term salary comes from salt? This is because, in antiquity, this mineral was so valuable that it was used as a bargaining chip. That was, who had a lot of salt or salt mines was considered rich. At the time of the Roman Empire, soldiers often received part of the payment in salt, and from there came the term salarium, which later gave rise to the word salary. But this practice was not exclusive to the Romans. Ancient peoples such as the Hebrews, Egyptians, and Greeks also saw salt as a precious good. Preserved food was essential for survival and even served to seal alliances. In the Bible, salt is mentioned as part of the offerings to God, symbolizing commitment and purity. The alliance of salt was an eternal covenant, something too valuable to be broken. If we stop to think, the salt of that time was like gold or money today. But unlike gold, he had a much greater purpose, preserving, flavoring, and symbolizing fidelity. So the next time you receive your salary, remember in the past, he could have come in small grains of salt. Another factor that we should be attentive is that we are often deceived by the enemy's tricks, which tries to distort the truth about salt and its spiritual use. Salt, an element created by God for divine purposes, has been misrepresented over time, being associated with obscure and evil practices. However, we must remember that the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. The misinterpretation of salt use as an evil tool is a lie perpetuated by the enemy to divert the faithful from the true essence and power of this mineral. By understanding the divine origin of salt and its function as an instrument of protection and purification, we can set free from false beliefs and use this gift from God with wisdom and discernment. God, in his infinite wisdom, uses the material elements to manifest his spiritual power and fulfill his divine will. A remarkable example of this is in the practice of oil anointing, repeatedly mentioned in the Holy Scriptures. Anointing oil was used in the Old Testament as a symbol of consecration and separation for sacred purposes. Upon being spilled upon the high priest, its descendants, and even over the tabernacle and its furniture, the oil represented the mark of holiness and divine presence. However, it is important to emphasize that power did not live in the oil itself, but in obedience to the ritual established by God. The anointing oil recipe contains specific ingredients such as myrrh and cinnamon, indicating that it was not the substance itself that had supernatural power, but obedience to the divine command expressed in the ritual. Just as salt preserves foods of physical corruption, anointing oil symbolized spiritual protection and consecration of the chosen to serve the Lord. Therefore, understanding the importance of the correct use of these elements in religious rituals leads us to recognize God's faithfulness to use material creations to reflect his spiritual plan and manifest his power to believers. In the famous Sermon on the Mount, Jesus looked at his disciples and proclaimed a phrase that would cross the centuries: "You are the salt of the earth." What if salt becomes insipid? With what is to be salted with? For nothing more but to be thrown away and stepped on by men. But what does that mean? In the ancient world, salt was essential. He retained the food, avoided deterioration, and enhanced the taste. Jesus compared their followers to salt because they had a mission to preserve the truth, to influence the world, and to prevent corruption from dominating society. But there's an interesting detail: the salt of that time was not as pure as we use today. When exposed to moisture and mixed with impurities, he lost his ability to salty and became useless, being thrown to the floor as a type of gravel. This is what Jesus meant. If the Christian loses its purpose, failing to positively influence the world, it becomes as a valuable, worthless, without function. The question that remains is, are we being salt of the earth? Does our actions really make a difference in the world around us? In the context of purification rituals in the Old Testament, the use of salt played a crucial role in the consecration and sanctification of the offerings presented to God. The order of seasoning with salt all offering was a divine instruction to guarantee the purity and acceptance of offerings by heaven. Salt, by its preservative and purifying nature, symbolized the integrity and holiness required in the offers dedicated to the Lord. By spreading salt over offerings, priests and faithful demonstrated their reverence and commitment to divine will, ensuring that each sacrifice was consecrated according to God's precepts. Thus, the correct use of salt not only emphasized the sacred character of offers, but also reflected the importance of purity and dedication in worshiping the Most High. The Salt Pact, established by God, transcends time and history, remaining as a perpetual symbol of divine faithfulness and commitment. The sealed covenant with the correct use of salt is an expression of the eternity of God's purpose to their children, demonstrating their constant presence and protection throughout generations. Just as salt preserves the foods of corruption and purifies contaminated spaces, Salt Pact represents God's unquestionable promise to bless and keep those who honor and serve Him with sincerity. Each grain of salt is a tangible reminder of the divine covenant, a continuous memory of the Creator's love and grace to His chosen people. Therefore, by using salt as a spiritual weapon and a symbol of consecration, believers renew their commitment to God and witness their unshakable fidelity over the centuries. Now, stop and think. In a few minutes, you discovered how much amazing things salt represents in divine vision. He seized alliances, symbolized the eternity of God's purpose, was used to purify, protect, and preserve, and even represented the mission of the followers of Christ in the world. Each grain of salt is a tangible reminder of the divine covenant, a silent witness to God's unshakable fidelity over the centuries. The next time you hold a handful of salt in your hands, remember you are not just seeing a simple seasoning. You are holding a symbol of the Creator's grace, protection, and eternal commitment to your people. If this content was valuable to you, I ask you to support me with your registration so as not to lose any of our next videos. Share this video with family and friends. Like and leave your opinion in the comments. The pact established with God through the correct use of salt is eternal and in force to this day. May God bless you.